Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining our webinar today about qualitative options with online communities. We are definitely excited that you're here, and today on the webinar we have Ray Poynter. So Ray Poynter is author of the Handbook of Online Social Media Research, the Handbook of Mobile Market Research, editor of Isamar's book, Answers to Contemporary Market Research Questions, a course author for the University of Georgia's Principles of Marketing Research online course, and the founder of newmr.org. Ray has spent the last 35 years at the interface of research, technology, and insight, and is in wide demand as a consultant, trainer, workshop leader, and keynote speaker. We're very excited to have him on the webinar today. I am Dan Fleetwood, president of Question Pro Communities. I will be hosting the webinar today and bouncing some questions off Ray at the end. So make sure that if you have questions that come up during the webinar, that you use the question and answer feature. It should be at the top of your screen. Go ahead and post your questions. I'll be moderating them, and we'll have a fair amount of time at the end to get into some good discussion here. So we'll definitely be excited about that, and post the questions again as they come up. Again, we'll also email a copy of the recording at the end of the webinar to you as a follow-up. So be sure to be on the lookout for that as well. So without further ado, Ray, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, Dan. Thank you, and welcome to everybody on the line. So today we're going to look at why qualitative options for online communities. What is it that we can leverage about these communities that gives us something extra? And then we're going to look at the issue of synchronous versus asynchronous qualitative. This has always been there, but the language has developed, and there are now so many more options than we used to have. A lot of the time, we end up with things that are essentially discussions. So we have focus groups, we have depth interviews, we have online discussions and bulletin board groups. But there is so much more than just discussions, and we're going to look at that. And then I'm going to get my crystal ball out, and we're going to look at the future. What sort of things should you be looking for? Should you be starting to think now and planning ahead to use? And then, as Dan said, we're going to have Q&A. Okay, so leveraging communities. Mostly, the things I'm going to be talking about today are about ongoing communities, communities that you've set up and you operate for months or years. Many people now have communities that have been running for several years, some 10 years plus. So there are lots and lots of options that you can do with those. Most of the options that I'm going to talk about today will apply to short-term communities where you've got them set up for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks. But the really big benefits come when you have your community operating on a long-term basis. The first of those benefits is because people are ready, profiled, and waiting. All of that recruitment process has been short-circuited, has been built into the process, has been automated. If you want people who are really good at talking about this sort of topic, you know who they are in the community. If you want heavy shoppers who've got smartphones, you know who they are in the community. If you need people who live in rural locations who can only shop once or twice a month, you know who they are because they are profiled. You have the history of all the conversations and of all the surveys you've ever done with these people, and they are signed up. They're willing and they're happy and they're engaged and they want to help you take the brand forward. What sort of things are we doing? Well, we can clarify and expand on earlier feedback. Sometimes you run a survey maybe and you get some responses and you just can't understand. People say, yeah, I'm really happy with that. No, I don't intend to buy it. And you go, what? With the online communities, you can then engage those people in a qualitative exercise to find out what that really meant. It's sometimes you notice you've done a survey and you missed something really important. It popped up in some of the open ends. Well, go back and have a discussion about it. Really explore what's going on. Because we know about these people, because we're connected to them, we have multiple channels. We can connect with them over mobile, online. We can get them to collect video. We can use messaging apps like WhatsApp, WeChat, Line, Facebook Messenger. So there are lots and lots of different ways that we can connect with people because we have this relationship. The whole essence of what I'm talking about today is the relationship you get when you have an online community, and you can then leverage it for qualitative research. And something else that's been happening around the world that I've been noticing is that many people running communities have started to train, although that's a little one way. Actually, it's more an evolving thing where a language develops between members of a community and the moderators and the people running the community. So I see some communities where they've started using emojis really heavily. So when you put a post, put an emoji with it. When you see somebody else's post, apply an emoji to it, and then we can very quickly sort the comments using those emojis. We can ask people to use post-it notes. There's a really great community I can think of, and they make extensive use on everything of post-it notes. Another one is using word games. So there are new ways of developing languages and meta languages between the people running the community and the members out there. And it's, as I say, train almost sounds too one way. You want to let these languages evolve. Listen to how your community members are talking to you. Develop systems which can be more efficient. They can be richer. They can reach deeper into the meaning that people are trying to share with you. So, what are the things that trigger qualitative research with the community? Well, the first one, of course, is absolutely all the normal stuff. If somebody comes to you as a colleague and they say, we want to explore pathways to purchase, you say, that's great. We've got some people already profiled. We'll set up this exercise. We'll do a piece of qualitative research. If we need to explore new concepts, yeah, fine. We've got people already profiled, ready to go. We can turn around those sort of qualitative projects often overnight. So really fast and quite deep. Or we can have longer projects that take days and weeks. So all of that is part of the normal process. Another thing I'm seeing happen a lot is very targeted activity. So this is particularly where people have transactional data, big data, and they can't understand what's going on. So we've got some really satisfied customers, but they've got low spend levels. How can we explore that? An example of these, I saw an airline in Asia recently. They found a whole bunch of people who were traveling a lot. They were accumulating air miles and they weren't redeeming them. And they were trying to work it out. And they were nearly ran a survey. And then they thought, duh, why don't we just phone up some of these people? They have the telephone numbers, they have the permission, they identified people from the database who were in this category, so travel a lot, lots of air miles, not redeeming them, rang them up and explored the issues and got a much better, deeper understanding of what was going on than they would ever have got by trying to work it out themselves, and better than they would ever have got by writing a survey, because you can only really write a survey when you know what the answers are and you want to quantify them. When you don't know what the answers are, you need this qualitative research. As a responsive project, so recontacting people who preferred option A and explore why. So we're running a test, everybody in the company thinks C is going to win, A wins. Now we want to know, why is it winning? Have we undersold C? Is there something about A that we hadn't understood? Should we be taking the benefits of A and applying them to C? All of those are able to go back in, find those people in the community who took part in the concept research, find the ones who preferred A to C, and have some sort of qualitative exercise with them. So I'm just occasionally losing control of the keyboard. Member-generated projects, another great idea. You want to engage people in the community. You want to keep them really active. So sometimes you want to give the members of the community the opportunity to suggest, what should we be looking at next? How should we be exploring it? Which ways do you enjoy talking about things most? Have you seen something on the TV or in a shop that you think we should be doing in this community? So all of those are great ways of taking things forward. So these are the things that cause us to do the research in the communities and some of the triggers. Now let's look at a bit of structure. So before we had online, we were face-to-face. And what we now call synchronous were really focus groups and depth interviews. And these two are still enormously important. There are still an enormous number of face-to-face focus groups A lot of depth interviews, probably more telephone depth interviews now than face-to-face, but still a lot. And asynchronous is a term that we have applied because of technology, but it's always been there as a concept, because diaries, where we left diaries with people to take them away and do the research, that was asynchronous. Asynchronous means the moderator is not talking to the participants in real time. Tasks are set, people go away and they complete the tasks. Now let's think about our modern, connected, Skype-friendly, community-friendly world. We've added online and video focus groups to the face-to-face focus groups, and that's great. It means that we can do things a lot faster. Somebody comes into your office with a question in the afternoon and says, can we look at this? Well, yes, you can run a focus group that evening with members of the community who happen to be available because they're signed up, ready, and profiled. We've also got online and video added to the telephone depth interviews. So that's great. But the real growth area has been in this asynchronous online world. Start with bulletin board groups, online discussions where people join in, and maybe the discussion runs for 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks. People have thoughts, come back, and they keep adding new comments. The moderators can generate the prompts to go out in sequential sets, so they don't even have to be online all the time. Now, the moderator doesn't have to be there at the same time as the people in the discussion group. We can get a lot richer feedback. We can ask people to collect information. We can do online diaries. We can get them to write blogs. So for example, if you've got people who are looking for a new mortgage, they're looking for a new investment package, they're looking to book a holiday of a lifetime, they may take months over that decision. If you can get a few of them to keep a blog, you will have a much better understanding of the pathways to purchase than if you ask people to think backwards. Because when people think backwards, the end result looks like it was inescapable. It was always bound to end up here. But if you follow people through the process, you will see how many blind alleys they go down. We can also capture video logs where people are taking a little video and they're uploading it. I've seen a lot of great work done in this area with things like cosmetics, women talking to their mirror and to their phone as they're putting on things in the morning, as they're taking off makeup in the evening, and really bringing things alive. Smartphone ethnography, we're going to talk more about ethnography, but where we ask people to use their smartphone to capture slices of their own life, slices of life of the people around them. Messaging groups. There's been real growth in the number of people using WhatsApp and WeChat and Line and Facebook Messenger to have a discussion amongst members of a community about a particular topic. It's much more dynamic, it's faster, it can really get to the moment. And we can also set up social tests like creating pin boards where people are adding pins, putting up new images, clicking them and sharing them through. So that's where we are with this asynchronous and synchronous world. And discussions are really good. I'm a massive fan of discussions. I use them on a regular basis. I see great work being done with them. But we can go so much further than discussions. And I'll be interested to know whether anybody types into the chat stream to Dan where this photo up there is taken. But I think it captures very nicely the idea of a much wider landscape. So we're going to have a look at smartphone ethnography, engagement and closing the feedback loop, more than just respondents, collaborative qual, and then crowdsourcing. So smartphone ethnography. The first thing is we have to be careful about what we mean. Every time somebody says smartphone ethnography, there will be some real ethnographers in the room cringing, because real ethnography takes something like 6 months to write up the proposal. Maybe you do a year of field work, and then you will do 2 years of writing up a thick and rich and deep analysis of the field work. And we take that process that an academic may take 3.5 years over, and we try to wrap it into something that can be done in a day or two. So obviously it is not the same thing. We need to be careful when we use the term ethnography, but the concepts that we mean are really powerful. So it might be a diary. People are using their smartphone to collect a diary. We might be asking them to collect images, or videos of activities. I've seen some great ones where we've got people videoing how they make breakfast in the morning, videoing how they choose their clothes out of their wardrobe. Are we going to ask people to focus on themselves, or are we going to ask them to focus on other people? Is it going to be a true autoethnography or a collaborative ethnography where we're really asking people to think about what they've seen, to be reflexive? So they collect the information, then we discuss with them, what does that information really mean? How does it make you feel now you look back at that? Where is it taking you? If we're doing these sorts of ethnography, we have to make the tasks clear. When I see these projects going wrong, it's normally because the tasks are not clear, they're not engaging enough, and we need to make sure they're not too onerous. So if I want you to do an activity every time you have a drink during the day, I will probably only ask you to do it for one day, or I may ask you to do it for 4 weeks, but only one day each week. If, on the other hand, I'm looking at something to do with the preparation of breakfast, I might ask you to do that 10 days out of 14 days. I know that you're unlikely to be able to do the whole 14. I'll put a bit of an incentive in to see if I can get you to do it for all 14. But I want to make sure that we get a reasonably large base within that of compliance. And think about how you're going to process the information. When I come to the future, we're going to talk about automated processing of videos and images. It's almost here, but it isn't really great yet. So what you find is that people need to limit the video length. People will say, collect a 30-second video or a 60-second video, or upload 5 images from your wardrobe of things you're going to wear this week. Think about the complexity of passive data. You can collect tracking with permission, the tracking data of where people are 24/7. But how are you going to process that? Frequently, when I see good smartphone ethnography going on, it's done with 12, 15, 20 people in real depth. On the other hand, if you want a very simple exercise, and I saw a great presentation by the people at Research Now a couple of years ago, they got about 450 people videotaping what happened after they threw material into the toilet before they flushed it, and they then got it processed on scale. So that was just taking one very small element of life, a life that most people wouldn't really want to delve into too much. Much bigger scale. So we can do bigger scale if we don't collect very much. If we collect a lot of information, at the moment we're going to use fewer people to process that. One of the really vital things with an online community is engagement. You want to keep people ready, willing, and profiled. You won't do that if things are boring. And qual can be boring and it can be engaging. So you want to think about the design of your qualitative issues. Can you use gamification? Can you make it more fun? Can you make people feel like they're stars? Can you make them feel like they're Sherlock Holmes? Ask your community to suggest topics they would like to discuss, because they're going to feel some ownership in the process. When you get things from your community, say they've uploaded videos, ask them to describe what they did, give you a summary of it. If they upload images, if they upload audio recordings, if they've got passive data, so you know, here is their activity, here is your travel for the last 24 hours, ask them to summarize. Oh yes, that's when I went to the shop. Why did I go back to the shop? Oh yes, I forgot this. So you're going to get a richness that the passive data won't give you. Unless you share with them. And then feedback, comments, photos, videos to everybody else. People love to know how typical they are, how atypical they are. You can feed this information back. People are going to feel like stars of their own world if we do that sort of process. More than just a respondent. So the whole of the market research world is moving on from the word respondent to participant. But in many cases, once we've got a community, we can go a lot further than just a participant. Some of the best examples I've seen, I'm thinking now, for example, of Shortlist Media, a media company in the UK. They've got a community, and they've got a bunch of people from their community who are now judges of the annual awards. So when they have awards, they have a big event in London, they bring down these panelists, they sit with the other judges, they're treated as equals with the other judges, and they are becoming the experts. I see lots and lots of other communities where people in their community are becoming judges, trialists, people whose views are valued by colleagues, by stakeholders in the business. They will say, well, what does Jan in Brisbane think about this? Because these people have earned their respect by the quality of the comments they've made over time. So give your participants a chance to become skilled in your research approaches. They can add more value. So I've already mentioned emojis, but maybe adding virtual reality, adding some video training, showing them how to do things better is going to enrich their experience. It's going to be more engaging. It's going to up the credibility. If you want people talking to the camera and you're going to show it to the C-suite, it's much better if that's actually a well-produced thing. And those are the areas we can go to. And again, we come back to this point about giving the members a chance to set the agenda, suggest projects, discuss methods. Collaborative qual. Ask members to suggest topics is one element of that collaborative qual. Smartphone ethnography is another type of collaborative qual. It's not us asking people questions, it's us asking people to do things. And that is really what we mean about collaborative qual. We can extend the smartphone approach to ask people to do trend spotting, call hunting, reporting, sleuthing. If any of you are familiar with some of the research that Mesh do, where they're getting people to capture things, or some of the things that John Caron and Mark Earls have done in the UK, recruiting people to go out there and really seek things out, as opposed to simply reporting back to us what they've seen, asking them to look for things. All of a sudden, there are so many more people, and they can be generating more information. I'm a big fan sometimes of, as well, of asking people to solve a problem and asking them to come up with suggestions, but not asking them to use a specific method. So not saying, okay, we want you to measure this, we want you to find out this from the internet. We want to say, okay, how many different ways are there of serving and drinking a cappuccino? How would you find out how many cappuccinos are drunk in Portland? And somebody may come up with a survey, and somebody else may come up with talking to the people that do the purchasing for the chocolate that goes on the top of the cappuccino, because we know that if the amount of chocolate on the cappuccino is going up, the number of cappuccinos, and any number of other ways that people may be thinking of it. Maybe we're going to measure the discarded cups, all sorts of ideas. Maybe we're going to talk to baristas. So sometimes talking to people in open-ended ways, asking them to come up with solutions, is going to provide new and interesting insights. Crowdsourcing. So this is taking that idea even further, asking members to interpret their own contributions. We've mentioned this before, so they can add emojis, they can add additional comments, they can journal as they go along through the process. But we can also ask members to add comments and interpretation to other members' comments, especially in online discussion, blogs, vlogs. Now, if you've done online discussions, you will notice that most of the discussions happen between the moderator and the members. They don't operate between the members and the members very often. So it's up to you to put in some reasons, asking some people to be experts, to be captains on a particular project, incentivizing people to come up with meta-analysis or good probing questions of each other's content. I've seen some projects as well where members have been asked to code and analyze qualitative material. So in a very simple way, teaching them grounded theory, not just text, but actually also size, images and video, asking them to be semiotic, but intuitively semiotic. What does this mean to you? Is it positive or negative? Why is it positive? What does it remind you of? So that we get more and more feedback about how this may be achieved. achieved. Because one of the problems is that many of the people running companies, many of the people in market research departments come from a really narrow set of backgrounds. They are almost invariably graduates. They're almost invariably English as a first language if they're in an English-speaking country. They are going to be from better off backgrounds by and large. And if you're trying to understand what is going on in some depressed urban or rural area, having some feedback, some semiotic inputs from people who live there is going to give you a whole new perspective to what is happening. And this is really important. Qual with an online community does not need to be online qual. I'm seeing more and more non-online qual being done via communities. So the first one is make sure in your qualitative communities, you have stored telephone numbers and preferences, what time of day. You know, you do not want to be sitting there on the east coast of the USA and ring somebody up in Seattle at 9 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. It won't go down well. So you need to know a few bits and pieces. Do they want to be rung during work hours or outside work hours? Do they want to be rung on their landline, which would probably make them fairly odd these days, or on their mobile phone? Do they want to be sent a text message before you ring them to check it's okay? All of these bits and pieces. But once you've got that in place, quite often, rather than doing online qual, ring people up, have a chat with them, discuss it. Bring them into focus groups. I'm seeing more and more of this going on. I'm seeing it not just bringing people into a focus group, but also bringing people into a factory. I've seen John Deere fly people from Africa who buy their tractors into their factory, take them around. I've seen engineers be brought together at conferences to have discussions about, because they're members of an IT community. There are so many new ways we can do. In the UK, I saw a great project where they took people who were in a biscuits and snacks community to the biscuit factory. They got some great data, but boy, were those people engaged and enthused about the process. So don't just think online. And think messaging apps. This is an enormous growth area around the world. It's probably a little bit slower in the United States than in most other countries, where the use of apps is up around the 90-95% of people using smartphones. So have a look at that. But even SMS can be used in this sort of way. Qual does not need to be online qual, even for online communities. So we're going to wrap up now with quite a few thoughts about the future. Where are things going from automation to passive to virtual reality and DIY? So the first of those, automation and artificial intelligence. We're going to see things like chatbots. We've already seen a little bit of chatbots sometimes now when we're looking for help, when we're looking for sales, we might be dealing with a chatbot. But as these get better, we are going to see much larger communities. Not many people run online communities with more than 10 or 20,000 people. A few are up there around the 100,000, but it's hard work because community managers need to keep everybody engaged, and it's really hard to do that process. If we can have chatbots being the community managers doing the day-to-day management, then the communities can grow bigger. We can also run larger projects. So instead of one online discussion with 50 people, we can have 100 discussions, each with 50 people. Why don't I want more than 50 people in discussion? Well, if you've ever been in an online discussion where you post a comment and 60 other people post a comment and yours goes whizzing off the page and has never been read, it's really unsatisfying. So if we want conversations to be bigger, what we really want is 100 discussions with 50 active people, not one discussion with 5,000 active people. If we are using chatbots, one of the things that we're going to see is we're going to get much more systematic, consistent probing. The best qualitative researchers will be better than AI and chatbots for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe forever. But a lot of probing and qualitative moderation isn't the best. It's in that bottom 75%. And there we will see the chatbots within 3 or 4 years starting to rival them in terms of the quality of the probing. We can also see more multilingual work. We can see work being conducted in Spanish and in English, and in Canada in English and in French simultaneously, because the chatbots are working natively in French, they're working natively in English. Multicultural, so we can have those subtle changes in language that occur. For example, if you want to talk to English people and American people and South African English speakers, there are some cultural differences in how you do that. The chatbots can deal with that in a really effective way. So that's one aspect of automation and AI, but we're also looking at text and video analytics, and these are coming through now. We're already seeing more of this, and it's just going to become better and better and better over the next few years. So as we get more text analytics, we will encourage people to write more. So in the surveys, we will get them to write more comments, and we will ask fewer closed questions. We will get, both in surveys and qualitative research, more images, more videos. We will get longer videos. We won't say to people, please only upload one 30-second video, because if we've got machines processing them, we can say, upload as many videos for as long as you like. Voice analytics is moving along, so we will get people talking to devices when that is suitable as part of the process. And we're going to start seeing more analysis choices. We can set at the analysis stage of the online discussion or the online focus group, we can say, okay, please analyze that with grounded theory, and please analyze it with content analysis. Please use semiotics and discourse analysis and conversation analysis, and then do me a meta-analysis that tells me what is consistent between all of those and what is different. And I will then have a look at those and decide what I think the final interpretation is going to be. Because normally there isn't time to do more than one type of analysis. If you take something like grounded theory, there isn't usually time to do grounded theory properly at all. Now, if we start bringing in the machines, we can start saying, I want you to process this data several ways. Tell me what the findings are that are coming out with every single technique, and which findings are coming out differently. More passive biometric and neuro stuff. So we're going to get event-triggered qual. It's going to notice that people are in a particular location, they're in Starbucks, they're in the library, they're in the car. We'll trigger some information, we can have a discussion with them. More and more facial coding. People are looking at their smartphone, they're pressing buttons, they're typing in text, and it's reading their face, or they're talking and it's reading their voice and it's reading the face. Linking analysis to biometrics, so movement, location, activity, heart rate, potentially, more and more biometrics coming in there. However, this is going to raise some really interesting ethical issues about consent. It's easy for people to give you consent, but informed consent means they have to know what they're giving away. And if we're starting to read their voice stress, if we're starting to do facial analytics, people won't know what we're doing. If we're doing eye tracking and people are looking at the sexy girl or the sexy guy in the ad, they might be appalled to find out that we are seeing this. They may not even be aware they're doing it. So all of a sudden, some of these ethical issues about informed consent become much more interesting. Virtual reality and augmented reality. So the price of virtual reality is falling, opening up new opportunities. Some people are already doing this. They've sent out virtual reality glasses to members of their community, and they're getting them engaged in things. Of course, the numbers are smaller, but that is really suitable for qual. And because it's an ongoing relationship, we only have to send the glasses once, and then we can go back to them several times to do different projects. So it fits so well with online communities. The number of participants is smaller. We're using the equipment over and over. People are starting to create virtual worlds. Effectively, for those of you who remember Star Trek holodecks, we'll see a new type of Second Life, which is real situations, but with a key modification to them. However, most people think augmented reality is going to be a much bigger issue and a much more powerful issue than virtual reality. Think Pokemon Go. So you get people to look through their smartphone and see the world as it is with something added or something removed or something taken away. At the most basic, I saw a paint ad last night on the TV, and the paint company Dulux have got an app where you can point your smartphone at the wall, you can see your own smartphone, and then you can play around with different color schemes, and it will tell you what the name of that color scheme is that you can then buy the paint. Really, really straightforward, and this is going to be ubiquitous. We're going to have augmented reality all around us. And perhaps a bit of a worry, because most of the things I've said should be really encouraging to qualitative researchers. This is the one that might be less so. We are going to see more DIY qual. We've seen DIY quant all over the place. It's made massive inroads. It's changed the face of research, really. A lot of the things I'm talking about are going to do that for qualitative research too. We're going to automation lowers the barriers to creating qualitative research. There are going to be more and more tools available for qual. If you go to the app stores, you will already see a lot of tools for capturing slices of your life, for having discussions. AI chatbots to conduct qual, AI to help analyze qual. All of a sudden, people who had never really thought about qual, who don't have a great background in it, are going to be able to leverage tools together and be involved in this area. And sometimes that's going to be great, and sometimes it's going to be terrible. But that is how things change and develop in the world. So let's just wrap to get all that up with a big picture. Probably the single biggest benefit of everything I've been talking about is rapid qual. The fact that your colleague can come to you and say, we need to find out this, and you can say, great, we've got a community. We've got people ready, profiled and willing. We've got qualitative tools. I'll send out a request now. We'll have an online focus group tonight. I'll have you some results in the morning. Or we will set up this discussion. It'll run for 3 days. I'll have information for you on Friday. Or we'll set people off on a smartphone ethnography project, and we're going to have stuff for you next week, and it's going to be really rich, and it's going to have videos, it's going to have photos that you can use to help convince the C-suite that this is the way to go. You need to make sure that your colleagues in your company are aware we can do rapid qual. If you've got a community and you've got access to these qual tools, then you really need to shout about them to your colleagues, because too often your colleagues will be thinking that research slows them down, when in fact these days with communities it can speed them up. The range of qualitative options is growing. Online, offline, phone, synchronous, asynchronous, text, and increasingly beyond text. And when you're using qual, use it to enhance the members' engagement with the community, so people stay more engaged and more involved. And just as my voice is beginning to go croaky, I'd like to say thank you, and I look forward to questions.
Thanks for that, Ray. There are a few questions coming in, so I will go ahead and ask you those now. So a few questions came in about you mentioned emojis, and they're growing in terms of the amount of usage, and I think as you continue to go down the path of more qualitative type research, how do you analyze those and make sense of them? I mean, there's hundreds of different emojis that can be used. Do you limit the amount of emojis, or if someone gives a smiley face versus a thumbs up or an angry face? I mean, I think those are pretty clear, but some of the more obscure ones, how do you make sense of that? Is there standards that you have?
Well, lots of different companies are doing things, and some of them have got little emoji tools, and you can only use one of the emojis, and underneath it, it has this is what this emoji means and this emoji. Other people are just encouraging people to use emojis. And if, like me, you're not really an emoji person, then there's a very straightforward thing is you go one-on-one, you communicate with the member and you say, hey, what does that one mean? And sometimes you may even generate a discussion about it, because not everybody is going to agree, even at the level of the winky emoji.
Right.
I think the winky emoji can be quite ambiguous sometimes.
Yeah.
But I mean, the really easy cut is everything that is happy we will look at as one collection, and then everything that is sad we will look at, and everything which has got a sense of irony. So the winky one, the slanted mouth, and so on. Yeah, if somebody puts the emoji in with sunglasses, you're going to need to dig a little deeper. But it's a great starting point.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. There were a few other questions that came in here. So um, someone asked, can you talk about how to get started in creating and maintaining a community? So sounds like they're kind of thinking about starting a community and maybe some good best practices around that.
Yeah, the most important thing is that you have to be talking about people who have a community of interest. So let's say that you were thinking about Denver Broncos, the football team. People who follow Denver Broncos would be interested in joining a community. They'd be interested in helping it. And you might then have somebody in the business who says, well, let's get some non-sports fans into the community because they would be interesting too. But they would not actually be active. You'd have to pay them to be involved because they're not interested in the same things. There isn't a community going on there. So normally a community is around a product, a brand. So you'll have a Pepsi one or a Nike one or an Adidas one. You'll have an Apple one or whatever. Anything where people share an interest in a brand, you can have a community. Most of the media channels have a community. If you're interested in something slightly broader, like a lot of the wines and spirits companies have lots of brands. They don't have sort of the budget or the planning resource to have separate communities. So they will have a spirits or a wine drinking community because there is a community of wine drinkers. You don't have to stick with just one label, one vineyard, one style. So there you step back, you can have a cooking community. There are sports communities. But so the starting point is always, how can I envisage this as a community? And then how am I going to find enough projects in my organization to keep it busy? Because the quickest way of killing a community is not giving it enough to do. The second quickest one is giving it boring things to do. But actually the quickest is not keeping people engaged. They need to be hearing from you with something worthwhile to do at least monthly. For some types of communities more often than that. So you're thinking about those as issues. How are you going to be using that in the business? Is it a short-term project? So we are redesigning the company website. We would like to create a community to help us do that. It will last 3 months and then it's finished. That's a short-term community. Or are we saying that this business is really going to become customer-centric? We're going to put customers at the center of the business, in which case this community or its successor communities are a permanent feature. We're going to recruit people and we're going to co-create the future. So I think all of those are issues. And then once you've done that, you probably want to think about, do you want to balance qual and quant? Is it mostly qual? There are some fantastic communities that are mostly qual. There are some fantastic communities that are almost only quant. And then there are some which mix qual and quant. So you just need to be thinking about what are your interests? What works well in your business?
Great. Yeah, and I think that makes sense. Thanks, Ray. Another person asked, could you elaborate on the meaning of augmented reality?
So augmented reality is where you take what is going on around you and you add something to it. So if you drive with sat-nav is augmented reality, particularly if you've got the sort of sat-nav that sits on your dashboard and shows you a picture of the upcoming junction before you reach the junction. So now you've got reality, which is what you see through the windscreen, and you've got the augmented reality, which is an aerial view of the road ahead of you and what the signs are going to look like before you get there. So that is really practical, widely used augmented reality. To give you another example, there are things like zombie runners and so on, which are games. So you look at your smartphone and you can see the street as the street normally looks, except you can also see a zombie running after you and you can shoot them. Or if you are a jogger runner, then you run away from them. So we take that and we can say, okay, how can we use that? So you go in store, you look at the store through your phone, And as well as all the things that are already there, you see a new fixture, you see a new product, you see a new pricing structure. You go into a store and you have pictures of your home, you can see what the products in the store look like, in the furniture store in your home. Or you go online and you're actually in your home, you look through the phone and you see what those products would look like in your homes. That's augmented reality. We take reality and we add something to it.
Right. And Ray, would that be some of the uses that you've seen so far with seeing the product in your home when you're looking through, on your phone? Is that what you've
That,
seen?
yes, yeah, I mean, I've seen that quite a lot. It's now a lot of the leading brands will do that. They're also beginning to, you can look at somebody and then put an accessory on them for clothing. Some of the leading clothing brands have got that. At the moment, they're doing it mostly for marketing. And one of the secrets for market researchers is that most of these things are too expensive just to do them for market research. But if somebody is doing them for marketing, then they become accessible. If somebody is doing them for games, they become accessible, and we can use them in a research situation.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And then that was similar. We had another kind of question around that, the best uses of augmented reality that you've seen in market research. So I think that you kind of covered that with some of those examples when you were, kind of explaining or elaborating on the meaning of augmented reality. We had a few more questions, I think, just in general around communities. What are some of the advantages of if you have multiple communities, if you're an agency and you have multiple communities, is there any advantages in putting all of those in one community, or should you separate those out so that each client has their own community? Maybe if you can talk a little bit about some best practices there.
Um, it can go different ways. The most important thing is the community has to be a community. So there's a media company in London, and they sell all of the advertising boards on the London Underground and on the buses and places like this. And they have a community of urban living people. And they will do research for a wide variety of brands who are interested in urban living people. So they're not actually an agency, they're a buyer, but they sell research. So they're like an agency again. And that makes sense. That is their community. So if you've got a community of hipsters, you've got a community of Gen Zs, you've got a community of silver surfers, you could be selling those through. If on the other hand, I'm looking at that with my client eye view, most of the time I would like a community of people who want to co-create the future of the Hershey bar, who want to co-create the future of Ford Motors, who want to co-create the future of Dell with me. So then I want only one brand involved in that, if I'm coming from the brand side, and I want people to have a real sense of, this is my store, this is my brand, this is my computer, whatever. And I think that is best done that particular way. But there is a tension within that, because to some extent the large panel companies are trying to create communities out of panels, because then people will try harder, they will do more projects, they will be more responsive.
Right. Yep. No, I think that makes sense. We also had a question about, you mentioned that the picture, and you wanted people to kind of guess where it was at. So someone asked, where was that picture taken?
That is the Blue Mountains in Australia, and it's called the Three Sisters.
Three Sisters. Okay, great. So that should answer your question there, Ross. Anyway, and then we also have some questions about incentivizing and around a long-term community versus short-term, and quantitative versus qualitative. So what are some of the best practices there that you've seen, Ray?
Okay. For preference, I would usually have a long-term community. There are some situations like we want to redesign the website, we want to bring in these sort of people. Yeah, that speaks to a short-term community. But a lot of the cost and effort is in setting it up. So once you've got it, it's really nice if you've got a long-term community, you've got a program, you're taking it forward. For quant research, it's got a very nice feature in that most people either don't offer an incentive, that's usually because there's a legal reason that prevents them. People like the Australian tax office and people like that, they're not allowed to pay them. So they have to work really hard at motivating people to want to take part. But even those people that do pay them, they typically do things like prize draws. So you know that your incentive cost is capped. If you do a project that has 5 times the response level of another project, your incentive cost doesn't go up by 5 times as much, nor do any of your other costs. So it's a nice way of controlling costs within quantitative research. Within Qual, you're not just asking people to do a 5-minute survey. You're asking people to remember to photograph and make a comment about every drink they have for 24 hours. Or we want you to look at your wardrobe every morning before you pick clothes, take a picture of the wardrobe, and then put on the bed the clothes that you're going to put on and take a picture of those. Always going to say, we want you to go out to 5 stores and look for the following features. For that, you have to give people a much better incentive. It's not a prize draw. It's a fair incentive that reflects time. So you're probably talking something in the region of $15 to $50 an hour. Now, an hour might be a whole day's work. So we want you to photograph every drink you have for the day and write a comment about it. That's probably about an hour's work. So that might be about $15. It might be a bit more. But if you want people to do things longer, you're going to incentivize them more. So that is one of the things that caps sample sizes for qualitative. It's not just the analysis side, but actually the incentives go up when you do that. What's best, quant or qual? If you know what the answers are, quant is better. But if all you need to know is how many people fall into which buckets, then do qual. If you don't know what the answers are, then qual is better, in my opinion.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense there. Another question around, so in a developing country with limited resources but high online activity, do you have any suggestions on online engagement methods that can create a sustainable community? So kind of furthering that discussion around engagement and incentives really with limited resources.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of countries like Vietnam and so on, I've seen a lot of communities being done in those markets. In the lowest income places, then there's often a very good digital currency. So in Africa, there's M-Pesa. You can pay people in China with WeChat. So you can have micropayments as part of that process. 5 years ago, you could get people engaged just because it was new and innovative. That has passed now, and people are much more familiar, so they're not going to be bowled over and surprised that they're asked to take part online anymore. Frankly, even I suspect in places like Myanmar. So you're going to be using very similar techniques. The dollar amounts will tend to be smaller. So you should always be talking to people that know the local market and set things around those levels.
Right, and then can gamification play a role, Ray, if you have some of that built into the community?
Absolutely, in so many different ways. Make it competitive with people to find the best answers. Who has got the post of the week? Who's got the We'll be posting the 5 best images at the end of the project. People like that. It gives them recognition, star of their show, gamification, getting people to be the fastest people. So the first 10 people to respond will get an extra $10 or an extra so many yen or an extra so many dinar, whatever the currency is. That's a great way of using some of those incentives to bring things into faster speed. But while we're talking about multicultural, another feature is that you really do need to understand what is the right way to say things in different countries. In the United States, you might say, "Hi, Joe." In Thailand, that would be, "Hi, Mr. Joe." In Germany, that would be, "Hi, Mr. Smith," or "Dear Mr. Smith." So as you move around countries, the tone that you use. And in lots of countries, you've got some fairly subtle issues about whether in French and German, are you going to be using the tu or the vous form? Depends on the whole community you set up. So you can't use a cookie cutter when you start to run these out into different countries.
Gotcha. And I think maybe we have maybe a quick answer to this one, Ray. One quick question, and then we'll end the webinar here. But any recommendations for building an online qualitative panel apart from a project, meaning the agency would support the cost of recruiting the community, and then of course pass those costs on to the client when projects come up? Any recommendations around that?
I mean, that happens a lot, and it's now treated pretty much as a standard thing from an agency point of view. Don't use an agency that's never done it before would be my number one recommendation.
Right.
And control the variables. So if you have done lots of projects yourself as a client, this is your home country, then you can be a bit more risky on the agency. If you're doing a project in a country you've not done before or in an area you've not done before, work with an agency you've got experience of.
Great. No, thank you. Well, Ray, I think that about does it for today. Thank you very, very much for the presentation today. I know we got a lot of good responses. If we didn't get to any responses, perhaps we could take those questions down and answer those offline. If you want to get a hold of Ray or I, our contact information is up there on the screen, and we'll also be, again, sending out a recorded version of the webinar today. But Ray, thanks again, and thanks to everyone who attended.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone.